For a long time, I believed every thought I had. The thoughts sounded exactly like me. They had my memories, my fears, my specific brand of self-doubt. They even used my vocabulary, so it never occurred to me to question them. Why would you question something that sounds that much like yourself? And then one day, for no dramatic reason, I noticed something. I was anxious about something ordinary, the kind of moment where the mind starts running. And right there, in the middle of all that noise, I caught a thought before I swallowed it. I saw it arrive. I watched it land. And for the first time I asked, did I choose that? The answer was no. I hadn't chosen it at all. It had shown up the way a reflex shows up, automatic, fast, completely uninvited, and I realized that I had spent years treating uninvited thoughts as if they were my own conclusions. That was the beginning of something I'm still sitting with. You did not choose the first thought. The first thought that arrives in any situation is not a decision. It's a response built from everything that was layered into you before you had the vocabulary to question it. Your childhood, the things people repeated around you until they became invisible, the fears that got confirmed enough times to feel like facts, the stories that were handed to you about who you are, what you're capable of, whether you belong, whether you're enough. Krishnamurti said that a conditioned mind cannot see its own conditioning. That's the strange trap of the first thought. It feels like perception. It presents itself as the truth of the situation. But most of the time it's just a pattern, wearing the costume of an insight. You didn't build that pattern consciously. It was assembled over years, in response to 1,000 experiences you barely remember. Which means that when the thought arrives, I can't do this. I'm not the kind of person who succeeds at that. They don't actually like me. You're not hearing your own assessment. You're hearing a recording. Old information, playing on a loop, pretending to be present. The first thought is not your enemy. Having it is not a failure. It just isn't the full story, and it isn't you. So if you're not the first thought, what are you? There is a moment between the thought that arrives and the thought that follows. It's very brief, easy to miss, a gap. And in that gap, something happens that most people never notice. A choice. The first thought shows up. The mind wants to continue it, to build on it, to confirm it. And in that space before the second thought forms, a question is being answered. Are you going to follow this? Are you going to keep building in this direction? Or are you going to choose differently? The second thought is where you live. The second thought is the one you're responsible for. Because by the time it arrives, you had a moment, however small, where you could have gone another way. The first was automatic. The second was chosen. Even if the choosing happened so fast, it felt automatic too. If you've ever said, I'm an anxious person, or I always spiral, or I can't help it, my mind just goes there. What you're describing is a habit of following the first thought, instantly, without any space in between. You have trained yourself to close the gap before it opens. And because the gap never opens, it starts to feel like there was never a gap to begin with. But there was. There always is. This is the part that usually gets skipped. You can know everything I just said and still not change. I've been there. I remember a specific period where I had read enough, understood enough, could trace exactly where a pattern came from and why it was running. And one afternoon, something small happened. A conversation that went slightly wrong, nothing serious. And I watched myself spend the next 2 hours building a case, replaying the exchange, deciding what it meant about me, about the other person, about a dozen things that had nothing to do with what actually happened. I knew what I was doing. That's the part that's hard to explain. I wasn't lost in it. I was watching it happen and following it anyway, because stopping felt like losing something. Like, if I let go of the story, I'd have to let go of being right. And being right was what was holding the whole thing together. That's not a knowledge problem. That's something else. The mind has a vested interest in protecting the image it has built of itself. That image, your ego, your sense of who you are, was partly constructed from your patterns, from the stories your first thoughts have been telling you for years. So when you try to interrupt those patterns, you're not just changing a habit, you're threatening the structure. And the mind doesn't like that. It will argue with you. It will tell you that the second thought is fake, that you're fooling yourself, that this is just positive thinking dressed up in philosophical language. It will make the first thought feel more real, more urgent, more honest than whatever you're trying to choose instead. This is the ego protecting itself, and it does it brilliantly. Don't fight it. See it happening. Notice the resistance without treating the resistance as truth, because the resistance is also a thought, and it also arrived uninvited. When you can watch the mind argue against your own clarity without collapsing into the argument, something shifts. Quietly, but it shifts. I've noticed what seems like 4 stages in how people relate to this, and I think most conversations about the mind stop too early. The first stage is being unconscious of the pattern entirely. The second is becoming aware of it. The third is knowing what to do about it. The fourth, the one almost no one mentions, is knowing exactly what's happening, having every understanding available, and still not changing. That fourth stage is where most people live. It's also where most spiritual and psychological content stops being useful, because it keeps offering more awareness, more tools, more frameworks, as if the problem were a lack of information. But the person in stage 4 doesn't lack information. They lack something harder to name, a willingness to let the old structure go, a tolerance for who they become when the patterns stop running. If you've identified with your anxiety, your self-doubt, your recurring story, for long enough, those patterns are not just habits. They're part of how you recognize yourself. When they quiet down, it can feel like disappearing, and the mind will do almost anything to avoid that feeling. The second thought is not just a better thought. It's a small act of courage, because every time you choose it, you're choosing to be someone slightly different from who you were a moment ago. And that is uncomfortable, even when it's good. You will not stop having the first thought. That's not the goal. The goal isn't a quiet mind or a mind that only produces useful, constructive thoughts. The goal is a different relationship with what arrives. When the first thought lands, and it will, it always does, there is a you that can notice it without becoming it. A you that exists in the gap, however briefly, before the second thought forms. That you is not a concept. You can feel it. And once you have, even once, you know something that can't be talked out of you. You are not the voice that speaks. You are the one that hears it and decides what comes next. That gap is small, but it is yours. And everything starts from there.